The same ticking courtroom clock echoed as my daughter-in-law smiled, confident she'd already won. Still, I sat upright, fingers calmly tracing the grain of my husband's old wedding band. As the second hand clicked louder, it cut through her lawyer's voice like a blade. While she shifted in her chair, flaunting the ring she once mocked, I saw no shame. The same sound that once meant family now measured the weight of every lie. That's when I knew. She didn't just marry my son, she dismantled him. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The smell of turkey and roasted vegetables hung thick in the air as Sarah stepped into her childhood home, the familiar creak of the door announcing her arrival. She smiled faintly, adjusting the strap of her purse, her mind filled with the usual pre-dinner anticipation. Thanksgiving, a day she used to look forward to. A day meant for laughter, comfort, and the warmth of family. She hadn't seen them in months, and she was ready to forget the chaos of the past few weeks and just enjoy a relaxing afternoon with loved ones. At least, that was the hope. Her sister Lila was the first to greet her, her smile a little too wide, her hug a bit too stiff. "Sarah," Lila said, stepping back to eye her up and down. "You look, well, you know, relaxed." The emphasis on the word was subtle, but enough to make Sarah's chest tighten. I'm good," Sarah replied, forcing her lips to stretch into a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. She was trying, but it wasn't easy. Lila led her into the dining room where the family had gathered. Tom, their father, settled in his favorite chair by the window, scrolling through his phone. Jacob was helping their mom, Nancy, set the table, his brow furrowed as he quietly whispered instructions. Sarah could already feel the familiar undercurrent of tension, the type that lingered when expectations weren't met. Tom glanced up from his phone as Sarah entered, his expression unreadable. "Sarah, still not working?" he asked, his tone dry and pointed, the question hanging in the air like a cold draft. "Dad, it's—" Sarah started, but Jacob cut her off with a distracted shrug like the whole thing didn't really matter. "Let it go, Tom," Jacob said, the edge of irritation in his voice. "It's just a phase." He returned to arranging the silverware, not meeting Sarah's eyes. Her throat tightened. Just a phase. As if losing a job, a career she had built for years, was something as trivial as a passing inconvenience. It felt like a slap. Sarah pressed her lips together, her teeth biting back words that felt dangerous. Lila slid into the conversation effortlessly, her voice smooth, but laced with something sharp. "It's just, I mean, I've heard people say you should focus on getting something stable. You know, for your own good. It's been months now. How are you handling it?" Her words were sweet, but the underlying judgment made Sarah's pulse quicken. "Handling it?" Sarah repeated softly, glancing at her husband for support. But Jacob was busy setting the wine glasses, his focus entirely elsewhere. "Yes, Sarah. You know, you really should think about your future. What's the plan now?" Lila continued, her voice feigning concern but betraying something more like scorn. Each word hit Sarah like a stone. It wasn't just the comment itself. It was the knowing, patronizing tone, the feeling of being reduced to nothing but an unemployed failure in their eyes. She had worked tirelessly for her career, yet here, surrounded by the people who were supposed to know her best, she felt smaller than ever. Silence spread over the table, the clinking of silverware the only sound, as Tom's eyes bored into her. "Well, at least you're not running up any bills," he muttered, glancing down at his plate. "That's something." She could feel her hands tremble, but she clenched them tight under the table, trying to force back the hot sting of humiliation. She had never been the one to let anyone see her weakness, but now, in front of her family, it was impossible to hide the sharp ache inside her. Lila continued, oblivious to the tension building. You know, I've been so busy with the kids, but I've been thinking, if you need any advice on balancing a career and family, I can always help you. It's not too late to get back into something, Sarah. Maybe try something smaller, less high stress. Thanks, but I'm fine, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dinner was a blur of conversations that felt like white noise. Her mother kept offering to refill her plate, but Sarah barely touched the food. She picked at the stuffing, her appetite lost to the knot of frustration that twisted tighter with each passing minute. As the evening wore on, the edges of Sarah's thoughts blurred. She heard the hum of conversation, the sound of laughter that didn't reach her. She caught snippets of Lila talking about the kids, Tom reminiscing about the old days of corporate life, Jacob making idle comments that floated by without meaning, but none of it seemed real anymore. Not after the way they had made her feel, like a shadow of the person she once was. She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. I need some air, she said, her voice tight. The family didn't seem to notice or care. They continued in their comfortable, predictable rhythm, as if Sarah's absence wouldn't leave an empty space. Outside, the cool night air hit her face, but it did nothing to numb the burn in her chest. She walked aimlessly down the street, the rhythmic sound of her footsteps the only company she had. The stars overhead were bright, almost mocking in their quiet beauty. The streetlights flickered as she passed, their glow casting long shadows across the pavement. Sarah stopped, taking in a deep breath, willing the sting in her eyes to fade. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like the woman who had it all figured out. She felt lost, a failure, and it terrified her. Why does it matter so much? She whispered to herself, her voice shaky. Why did their approval matter? Why did she care so much about their judgment? She looked up at the sky, the weight of their expectations pressing on her chest, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt something shift inside her. Something she hadn't felt in a long time, determination. The walk had cleared her head, but it hadn't cleared her heart. A fire, kindled by their doubt, was beginning to spark. She wasn't going to let this be the end. It was just the beginning. But first, she had to figure out how to rise from the ashes. The chill of the night air had faded when Sarah returned home, but the weight on her chest hadn't. Her family's dismissive words echoed in her mind like a relentless drumbeat, reverberating through the quiet of her empty house. She stood by the front door for a long moment, the silence pressing in around her, before the warmth of the kitchen lights beckoned. Jacob was sitting at the counter, a glass of whiskey in hand, scrolling through his phone. Hey, Sarah said, her voice quieter than usual as she leaned against the doorframe. Hey, Jacob replied, not looking up. How was the walk? Good. Clear my head, she answered, but her mind wasn't clear at all. The anger and frustration churned inside her, mixing with something else, something new, a spark. He set the glass down, his gaze still fixed on his screen. Want to talk about it? Sarah shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. Not yet. She couldn't explain what she was feeling, couldn't articulate how the weight of their words had broken something inside her, but also set something else ablaze. Instead, she grabbed her laptop from the kitchen table and opened it, her fingers hesitating for just a moment before she typed in Amanda's name. The familiar email icon popped up, and she clicked, heart pounding. Hey Amanda, I need to talk. I've got an idea. The message was short, but as soon as she hit send, she felt a shift. A quiet, hidden excitement that made her breathless. The next morning, Amanda responded almost immediately. They scheduled a call for later in the day. Sarah couldn't wait. Her thoughts were racing now. She had something beyond her family's narrow views, something that could prove them all wrong. She could feel it in her bones. Later, as the call connected, Amanda's voice rang out warmly through the speaker. Sarah, I was hoping you'd reach out. What's on your mind? Actually, Sarah said, taking a deep breath, I've been thinking about starting something on my own. A company, something that brings sustainability and cutting-edge technology together. Amanda paused for a beat, and then Sarah heard her exhale slowly, like she was absorbing the gravity of the idea. Sustainability with tech. That's a huge space. Are you sure you're ready for this? You've been through a lot already. I don't care about that anymore, Sarah said, surprising herself. I'm ready for something new, something that could change the way people think about business, about technology and the environment. It could be big, Amanda. Amanda's voice softened with understanding. You've got the passion, Sarah. I've seen it in you. But this is going to be a challenge. Not just the startup world, getting investors, getting the right team behind you. It's all a lot. I'm ready for it, Sarah insisted. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The words felt right, but there was still a part of her that doubted. She had never run her own business before. She didn't know the first thing about securing funding or drafting a business plan. But she had to try, for herself, for her future, for the people who didn't believe in her. After the call, Sarah sat down at the kitchen table, her mind racing with possibilities. She'd already been thinking about it. The idea had been simmering in her mind for weeks. But after Thanksgiving, it was like something inside her had snapped into focus. She opened a new document and began typing, letting her thoughts spill out onto the page. She wanted a company that didn't just sell products. She wanted to change the world. To merge green energy solutions with the latest technology, creating systems that helped businesses run more efficiently while reducing their environmental impact. She could already see it in her head, solar-powered tech solutions that were affordable, scalable, and game-changing. Her hands moved faster than she could think, the words coming easily now, fueled by something deeper than just an idea, fueled by the desire to prove herself. But the more she wrote, the more the doubts crept in. Jacob's voice echoed in her mind, dismissing the whole thing. Just another distraction. His words stung, but she refused to let them define her anymore. She wasn't doing this for him, or for anyone else. Still, there was another voice, Lila's, asking how she'd balance it all, how she'd manage the stress of starting a business when she couldn't even keep her own life together. The question lingered in the air like a toxic cloud. Would she be able to juggle it all? Was she making a huge mistake? She leaned back in her chair, hands trembling slightly as she sipped water, trying to steady herself. No, she whispered to herself. I can do this. I have to. The next day, she began researching, reading everything she could find about startups, business strategies, and sustainable tech. She dug deep into the financial side of things, taking notes on potential investors and what they were looking for. She even started drafting a rough business plan, piece by piece, shaping her vision into something tangible. Jacob came into the kitchen later that evening, peering over her shoulder as she clicked through funding options on her screen. Still on that? He asked, his voice flat. Sarah didn't look at him. I'm building something. You wouldn't understand. She heard the soft exhale of disbelief from him, but she didn't care anymore. She couldn't afford to. That night, as she put her laptop aside and went to bed, Sarah's mind buzzed with plans, ideas, and strategies. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was moving forward, away from the past, away from the doubters. She was building something real, something that could change her life. But there was still so much to do, so much uncertainty. And the biggest question lingered. Would anyone believe in her dream the way she believed in it? Would she be able to make it happen, even if it meant facing the fears and doubts that still hovered just beneath the surface? She wasn't sure. But she was ready to find out. The soft hum of the computer screen was the only sound in the room as Sarah stared at the blank canvas of her new business website. She had always been someone who thrived on structure, who excelled when everything had a clear path. But this was different. She had no roadmap, no mentor guiding her hand. She was her own architect, designing her own future, and it was terrifying. Her small home office, tucked into the corner of the living room, had become her sanctuary. The walls were lined with bookshelves she had filled with entrepreneurial guides, tech journals, and sustainability manifestos. A giant corkboard in the corner was peppered with notes, ideas, and sketches of her business model. A whiteboard covered with ambitious goals, timelines, and motivational quotes hung opposite her desk. It was a far cry from the sleek, polished corporate offices she'd once worked in. There were no suits here, no conference calls. Just Sarah, her laptop, a coffee mug, and a mind brimming with determination. But as she typed the words for her homepage, doubts began to creep in. Where do I even start? She thought, fingers hovering above the keys. She had a vision, one that would revolutionize the tech industry by combining green energy with innovation. But turning that vision into a company? That was a different beast entirely. She had started by researching branding, diving into everything she could find about creating an identity for her company. What would people feel when they saw her logo? What would they think when they heard her company name? Every detail mattered. Sarah wanted her brand to reflect strength, sustainability, and a bold future. A direct challenge to the doubt she'd been facing for so long. As she worked late into the night, Jacob wandered in, his voice low as he leaned against the doorframe, watching her type. "You're still at this?" His words weren't unkind, but there was an edge of skepticism in his tone. He had supported her decision to try, in his own way, mostly financially, but there was always this lingering doubt in his eyes. "It's just a hobby, right?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but there was a sharpness beneath it. Sarah paused, staring at the screen, her stomach tightening. She had heard that question from him before, the one that made her feel like everything she was doing was somehow trivial, not worth the time, not worth the energy, like it was just a temporary distraction before she came back to reality. "I'm serious about this," Sarah said, her voice firm, though a knot formed in her throat. "It's not just a hobby." Jacob didn't respond right away. He nodded once, but it was clear he didn't fully believe her. "Okay, just make sure you don't lose yourself in it. Remember what's important." He turned and left, leaving Sarah with her thoughts. She wanted to argue, to tell him how wrong he was, how this was important. But instead, she pushed herself to keep working. She couldn't afford to waste time defending herself. Not anymore. By the time the website was live, she had created a simple but impactful design, sleek and modern, with a deep green color scheme that conveyed a sense of sustainability and progress. She wrote the copy herself, pouring her heart into every word. Her vision was clear. Her mission was clear. But there was one thing she couldn't ignore, the voice in her head telling her that maybe Jacob was right. Maybe she was getting ahead of herself. Maybe it was just too much. The self-doubt that had plagued her for months lingered just under the surface, but Sarah refused to give in to it. She couldn't. She had come too far. The next day, she received a text from Lila. "How's the project going?" Sarah could almost hear the judgment in Lila's words, though they were veiled in sweetness. Leela had never fully understood why Sarah wanted to keep pushing herself in a world that seemed so unforgiving. After all, Lila had it all: her kids, her picture-perfect house, her stable life. And that's what she couldn't understand. To Lila, Sarah's ambition was nothing more than an inconvenience, a source of family drama. Sarah's fingers tightened on her phone as she read the message again. She thought about the Thanksgiving dinner, about how Lila had questioned her choices, about how everyone seemed so sure she had made a mistake. She wasn't going to let them define her. Not anymore. She typed a short reply. "It's going great. I'm working on the website right now. I'll keep you posted." She put the phone down and stood up, pacing around the room. She had to do this. She had to prove them all wrong. That afternoon, she reached out to a few other entrepreneurs who had successfully launched startups in the green tech space. It felt intimidating, sending cold emails to people who had already accomplished what she dreamed of. But every reply she received made her more confident. One of them, Sarah King, had built a company that merged tech and sustainability just a few years ago and was now leading industry conversations. Their phone call was inspiring. Sarah took copious notes, and before the conversation ended, she found herself with more clarity than ever. "You need to fail fast," Sarah King advised. "It's okay to stumble. Just keep moving forward. The key is resilience." That advice rang in her ears as Sarah hung up the phone, her hands trembling with the weight of her new reality. She could feel it. This was the first step in a much bigger journey. Sarah took a deep breath, her gaze landing on the small stack of papers in front of her, detailing business plans and funding sources. She wasn't just learning to run a company, she was learning to rebuild her confidence. But just as she was about to dive back in, a thought hit her. What if they were right? What if this was just another failure waiting to happen? The doubt clawed at her again, but this time she refused to let it take root. She wouldn't allow herself to be defined by anyone's opinion but her own. She wasn't just working on a website. She was building the foundation of a future that would silence every one of her doubters. And she would prove to them all that she was capable of more than they ever thought possible. The conference room felt colder than it should have. Sarah stood at the front, her palms slick against the cool surface of the lectern, her nerves threatening to make her stumble over every word. She had spent months preparing for this moment, refining her pitch, drafting her presentation, rehearsing in front of the mirror until she could recite her vision in her sleep. This was supposed to be her big break, the moment she proved to everyone, to herself, that she was on the right path. But standing here now, with the panel's eyes fixed on her, she could feel the weight of doubt pressing in from all sides. She clicked to the next slide, her voice steady but not as confident as she'd hoped. "And our solution," she said, pointing to the graph on the screen, "is a hybrid technology that not only integrates sustainable energy into business operations, but does so with a scalable model that can be customized for any industry, whether it's tech, retail, or even healthcare." The room was silent. The panel members exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Sarah swallowed hard, the knot in her throat growing tighter. "I see where you're going with this," one of the panelists, a woman with sharp features and an even sharper tone, spoke up. "But the idea feels a bit too niche. We've seen similar projects in the past, and they've struggled to gain traction. What makes this different?" Sarah's heart skipped. She hadn't expected an easy ride, but this was different. This wasn't constructive feedback. It was rejection. Her breath faltered for a second. But she pushed through, forcing herself to smile. It's about creating a solution that can grow with the industry," she replied, her voice shaking just a little. "It's not about being one size fits all. It's about offering a tailored approach that adapts to the unique needs of each company, making sustainability not just an ideal, but a practical investment for businesses at every level." The panelist raised an eyebrow. "It sounds great on paper, but realistically, you're trying to sell a product to industries that have been slow to adopt these kinds of changes. Sustainability isn't a priority for most of them, at least not yet. You're trying to force a square peg into a round hole. Another panelist, a man with glasses, added, It's an unrealistic approach. You're targeting a market that's not ready to change in the way you're envisioning. The room seemed to close in on her, the air growing heavier with each word. Sarah's throat felt dry, her mind racing for the right response. But nothing came. Her vision had always been clear in her mind. This was the future. This was the path forward. But they were tearing it apart, piece by piece. You've got a good concept, the woman continued, her tone softening slightly. But I think you need to reconsider the scope. Start with something smaller, something practical. Then maybe you'll build up the credibility you need to take on these bigger industries. The last comment hit her like a punch. Start small. Everything Sarah had worked for, the months of planning, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, was being reduced to something small, something practical. She had come here to change the world, not to play it safe. But now, standing in front of this panel of so-called experts, she wasn't sure if her dream was ever going to be more than just that, an ideal. The meeting ended abruptly, the panel's disinterest hanging heavy in the air. Sarah gathered her things in silence, her mind numb, as if the rejection had physically drained all the energy from her body. She barely heard the polite nods from the other entrepreneurs as they filed out of the room. All she could think about was the sting of their words, the realization that her vision, her dream, had been dismissed as nothing more than an unattainable fantasy. As she walked through the lobby of the convention center, her phone buzzed with a message from Jacob. How did it go? Sarah sat on one of the plush chairs, staring at the message for a long moment. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she debated how to respond. What did it matter? She tapped out a quick reply. It didn't go as I expected. When she got home later that night, Jacob was waiting for her on the couch. He didn't ask how the pitch had gone. He didn't need to. Sarah's face said everything. I'm sorry, Jacob said, his voice softer now. But maybe it's time to let this go. You've been at it for months now. Maybe it's just not the right time. Let it go? Sarah's voice cracked as she stood in the doorway, her heart aching. You think I should just quit? Because they didn't like it? I don't want to see you keep going in circles, Sarah, Jacob replied, frustration in his tone. Focus on the things that matter. Family. Stability. This is all just a distraction. Sarah's vision blurred as the tears welled up in her eyes. She wanted to scream, to tell him how much this mattered, how this was the only thing that felt real anymore. But she couldn't. She could feel herself losing it, the dream slipping through her fingers like sand. The words from the panel kept echoing in her mind, louder now. Niche. Unrealistic. Were they right? Was this all just a waste of time? Later that night, after Jacob had fallen asleep, Sarah sat at her desk, staring at her laptop screen. The cursor blinked back at her, a silent reminder of everything she had yet to achieve. The feedback from the panel replayed in her mind. Start small, start practical. The words stabbed at her. But then, a message from Amanda lit up her screen. Sarah, I know you're disappointed, but don't let them define you. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. Refine your pitch. Make it stronger. We'll get there. I believe in you. Sarah read it 3 times, letting the warmth of Amanda's belief wash over her. She wasn't alone in this. She couldn't let this setback be the end. Not yet. With renewed determination, Sarah reopened her business plan, adjusting her pitch. She wouldn't give up. Not now. Not ever. But the road ahead was getting harder, and the doubts, those constant whispers, were louder than ever. Would she be able to rise above them? Or was she just fighting a losing battle? The meeting room was stark, its modern design almost intimidating in its simplicity. White walls, a polished wood table, and sleek chairs that creaked beneath the weight of Sarah's anticipation. She had been here before, standing in front of a panel of skeptics, but today was different. The familiar doubts that had gripped her in the past were nowhere to be found. She had refined her pitch, adjusted her business plan, and most importantly, she had finally come to terms with what her company could become. She glanced down at her laptop one last time, her slides shimmering with clarity. The words she had crafted, scalable, sustainable, future-focused, felt less like dreams now and more like tangible goals. It was still the same idea, but this time, it felt different, more real, more achievable. The investor in front of her, a seasoned venture capitalist with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, was silent. He'd been listening intently, his gaze fixed on Sarah as she presented her refined vision. And with this model, Sarah finished, her voice steady, we can reduce carbon footprints in multiple industries, from tech to retail, with tailored solutions that grow alongside each business. The long-term savings from energy efficiency will outweigh the initial investment, and the return on that investment is something every major corporation can't afford to ignore. She clicked to the final slide, a sleek diagram showing projected growth, energy savings, and environmental impact over the next decade. She held her breath, waiting for the moment that could change everything. The investor leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in front of him, his gaze never wavering from her. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Finally, he spoke. "You've refined your pitch," he said, his voice low but clear. "And it's impressive. You've convinced me that this is more than just a pipe dream." Her heart soared. This was it. "I'm willing to offer you the funding you need to take this to the next level," he said, his lips curling into the slightest of smiles. "But there's a catch. This isn't a one-man show. You need to build a team. Surround yourself with the right people who believe in your vision." "I can do that," Sarah said without hesitation, her voice rising with newfound confidence. She could feel it. Everything she'd worked for was finally falling into place. They spent the next hour discussing the finer details, the terms of the deal, and the potential for expansion. Sarah walked out of that meeting with a check, a sense of validation she hadn't realized she'd been craving, and the unmistakable feeling that this was just the beginning. Back at home, she couldn't wait to share the news. Jacob was sitting on the couch, his feet propped up on the coffee table, flipping through a magazine. When Sarah walked in, her eyes wide with excitement, he looked up, expecting the usual tired conversation about progress. "Well?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "I did it," Sarah said, her voice barely containing the rush of joy. "I got the funding, they're backing me. I'm going to take this business to the next level." For a split second, Jacob didn't respond. Then, his lips twitched into something resembling a smile. That's good. Really good." He seemed genuinely happy, but Sarah noticed the lingering hesitation in his eyes. It wasn't disbelief. It was more like caution, like he was waiting for the inevitable crash. "You don't have to worry," Sarah said, sitting next to him, her hand resting on his. "This is real. I'm building something. Something that could change everything." Jacob nodded slowly, but his gaze dropped to the floor. "I hope you're right, Sarah. But I've seen you put your heart into things before, and I don't want you to get hurt again." She squeezed his hand. "I'm not going to get hurt. Not this time." But as much as Jacob tried to hide it, Sarah could see the doubt in his eyes. He was worried. For her. For their future. She pushed the thought aside. This was her moment, and nothing was going to hold her back. The next morning, Sarah made her first call to assemble a team. She reached out to former colleagues who had shared her passion for sustainability and innovation, offering them a chance to be a part of something groundbreaking. Slowly, but surely, She began to gather a group of like-minded individuals who were just as driven, just as hungry for change as she was. Each new hire felt like a victory. Sarah watched as her vision began to take shape, one person at a time. Together, they would build the company that would change the industry. It wasn't just about technology, it was about building a legacy, about proving to everyone who had doubted her that she could and would make it happen. Lila, as usual, had something to say when Sarah told her the news. "I don't know, Sarah," she said, her voice tinged with skepticism. "You're just delaying the inevitable. This is a lot of work for something that's probably going to fall apart. I don't want to see you end up disappointed again." Sarah felt the sting of her sister's words, but this time, they didn't hit the same way. "I'm not delaying anything, Lila. I'm building. And you can either watch me do it or keep doubting. But either way, I'm moving forward." Lila's silence on the other end of the line said it all. Sarah had said enough. By the end of the month, Sarah's company was gaining traction. She had hired the right people, and they were already getting results. The tech was working. The business model was sound. It was happening. But as Sarah stood in the conference room that evening, preparing for yet another meeting with investors, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. She could feel the pressure building, the weight of her choices settling in on her shoulders. There were still so many obstacles ahead, so much uncertainty. But one thing was certain: she wasn't going to back down now. This was her chance. And she was going to take it, whatever it took. The next chapter was already unfolding, and Sarah was ready to meet it head-on. But as the door to the conference room opened, she couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest challenges were yet to come. The day Sarah's product was officially launched felt like the culmination of a dream that had been years in the making. Her company's sleek new website went live with a bright, bold announcement, revolutionizing sustainability with tech that works for businesses of every size. Sarah watched the traffic spike on the analytics dashboard as word spread across social media. She could hardly contain her excitement. Her phone buzzed continuously, emails, messages, notifications, all pouring in faster than she could keep up. The work she had poured into perfecting her pitch, refining her product, and building her team was finally paying off. It wasn't just a success, it was the success. The product was a hit. Major corporations, from tech giants to eco-conscious retailers, had started taking notice. Within weeks of the launch, contracts started rolling in. In the months that followed, the press couldn't stop talking about her. Articles in industry magazines, features in major business outlets, and interviews with leading sustainability blogs. Sarah was everywhere. She was hailed as one of the top up-and-coming entrepreneurs in the green tech space. The words disruptive and innovative were now synonymous with her company's name. It was surreal. Every milestone was a victory, but each victory led to more pressure. Sarah had crossed a threshold, but the stakes were higher than ever. As she sat at her desk one afternoon, reviewing contracts for new partnerships, Jacob walked in, his eyes scanning the papers on her desk. He paused for a long moment, taking in the sight of Sarah surrounded by the proof of her success. "I've got to admit, Sarah," Jacob said, a hesitant smile tugging at his lips, "I didn't think this would happen, but you've really made it." The words hung in the air, a mix of pride and caution. There was no denying it now. Sarah's business was thriving, and Jacob had seen the turnaround with his own eyes. But there was still a part of him that held back, as if waiting for the other shoe to drop. Sarah met his eyes, her smile genuine but guarded. "I've just started," she replied, standing up and walking toward him. "This is just the beginning." Jacob seemed to relax a little, his shoulders shifting as he nodded. "Right, I didn't want to see you hurt again." His voice softened, the weight of past doubts still lingering in his tone. Sarah reached out and squeezed his arm, an unspoken reassurance that she had this. She wasn't looking back anymore. She had made it, and nothing was going to stop her now. The next challenge arrived in the form of Lila. Sarah's sister still hadn't fully embraced the success that had followed Sarah's persistence. When Sarah shared the news of landing another major contract, this time with a global technology company, Lila's response was less than enthusiastic. "You're getting lucky. That's all," Lila said, the familiar edge of condescension creeping back into her voice. "This kind of thing doesn't last, Sarah. You can't keep riding on the coattails of this sustainability trend forever. What happens when it fades?" Sarah's stomach churned, but she kept her voice steady. "It's not luck, Lila, it's hard work, and it's a good idea. This is the future of business. It's not just a trend. It's necessary." "I don't know, Sarah. It's just a lot of work for something that's not going to hold up," Lila replied, her skepticism still evident. The sting of her sister's words was sharper now than it had been before. But Sarah had learned something valuable in the last few months. The doubts of others didn't have to define her. Not anymore. She refused to let Lila's negativity cloud her moment. So, she kept moving forward. Her company was growing faster than Sarah had ever expected. She had hired a passionate team, brilliant engineers, marketers, and business strategists, each one eager to help scale the company into something that could change industries on a global level. The energy in the office was electric, a buzz of creativity and ambition. With every hire, the company grew stronger, more resilient. One evening, as Sarah was leaving the office, she received an email that made her stop in her tracks. It was an invitation to speak at a TEDx event in New York, an opportunity that sent her heart into overdrive. They wanted her to share her story, the journey from being laid off to launching a successful green tech startup. This wasn't just a chance to speak. It was a chance to change the narrative, to inspire thousands of entrepreneurs around the world who were battling the same doubts she had faced. She accepted immediately. Days later, Sarah was in front of a live audience, the bright stage lights blinding her as she shared her story. She spoke of the Thanksgiving dinner when her family had labeled her unemployed, and how that moment had ignited a fire in her. She talked about her failures, her struggles, and how each setback had only fueled her determination to succeed. She spoke about sustainability, not just as a business model, but as a way of life, a philosophy that was shaping the future. The standing ovation she received at the end was more than just applause. It was affirmation, validation. Her story was reaching people. She was no longer just a woman with an idea. She was a thought leader in the industry. She had created a movement. As Sarah stood backstage after her talk, her phone buzzed. It was another message from Amanda, her mentor, the woman who had believed in her from the start. "You're changing the world, Sarah. I knew you could do it." And for the first time, Sarah truly believed it. She was changing the world. But as she looked out over the New York skyline that evening, a quiet voice in the back of her mind reminded her that success wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And the hardest part, the part that would truly test her, was still ahead. For now, though, she was ready. Ready to face whatever came next. The phone call came just as Sarah was sitting down to dinner. Her fork clinked against the plate as her phone vibrated on the table. The screen lit up with a name that made her heart skip a beat. Time. She had to steady herself before answering, pressing the phone to her ear as her breath caught in her throat. "Hello? Ms. Thompson? This is Jennifer Williams from Time magazine. I'm calling with some very exciting news. On behalf of our editorial team, I'd like to inform you that you've been named Person of the Year for your outstanding contributions to sustainable business." For a split second, Sarah couldn't speak. The words hung in the air like a dream too big to grasp. Person of the Year? She was being recognized in the same way that visionaries like Elon Musk and Malala Yousafzai had been. The weight of it didn't quite land at first, until it did, all at once. Oh my God, Sarah breathed, feeling an unfamiliar rush of emotions flood over her. This is, this is incredible. The editor on the other end laughed, a warm, knowing sound. It's well-deserved, Ms. Thompson. Your work in sustainable tech and your story of resilience have inspired so many. We're thrilled to be honoring you this year. The phone call continued, but Sarah's mind raced, her heart pounding as the significance of the moment set in. This wasn't just about a title, it was about everything she had fought for, every hour spent working, every moment of doubt she had fought through. It was validation, proof that all the sacrifices had been worth it. When the call ended, Sarah sat in silence for a moment, her hands shaking. The room around her felt both far away and incredibly close, as if the very walls were reverberating with her success. She stood up slowly, pacing across the room. The distant hum of traffic outside barely registered. She wasn't sure if she should laugh, cry, or scream. So, she did all three. The night of the Time Gala arrived like a whirlwind. Sarah stood before the mirror in her hotel room, slipping into the elegant gown she had chosen for the occasion. It felt surreal to be here, preparing to accept one of the most prestigious honors in the world of business. She took a deep breath, adjusting the diamond necklace at her throat, and ran her fingers through her hair. There was no turning back now. This was the moment that proved everything. When she stepped onto the stage at the gala, the flash of cameras was blinding. The room was a sea of faces, industry leaders, celebrities, and influencers. And there, front and center, was Sarah. The weight of the world seemed to lift off her shoulders as she walked to the podium, each step feeling more like a triumph than the last. The host's voice echoed through the grand hall. Tonight, we celebrate a visionary who has not only transformed the business world but has made it better for all of us by integrating sustainability and innovation in a way that will resonate for generations. Please welcome Time's Person of the Year, Sarah Thompson. The applause thundered through the room. Sarah took a moment, allowing the sound to wash over her. This was it, the culmination of her journey. She was no longer the unemployed woman they had once pitied. She was a leader, a symbol. She stepped up to the microphone, the weight of the honor settling in. For a split second, she considered speaking about her journey, how far she had come from that lonely Thanksgiving when her family's doubts had clouded her future. But as she looked out at the sea of faces, she chose something different. I stand here tonight not just as a businesswoman, but as a woman who refused to be defined by anyone else's limitations, Sarah said, her voice steady, her eyes scanning the room. I was once told that I was too much of a dreamer, that I was unemployed, unfit to succeed. But tonight, I'm proof that those words mean nothing. The crowd applauded again, but this time it wasn't just the press. They were applauding for the struggle, for the fight, for the resilience that had brought her to this stage. In the crowd, Sarah could see Lila's face. Her sister, still skeptical and distant, clapped with a stiff smile, though Sarah noticed the flicker of something else behind her eyes. Regret, maybe, or realization. And then her eyes flicked to Jacob, sitting near the front. He was smiling, genuinely now, and Sarah could see the pride in his eyes. The fear, the doubt, had faded into something else. He had always believed in her in his own quiet way, but now it was clearer than ever. They had all watched her rise from nothing, watched her take every single punch and turn it into something that could change the world. Later that night, as Sarah stood by the windows of the gala hall, gazing at the city lights below, her phone buzzed again. She checked the screen, and this time, it was a message from Amanda. I knew you had it in you. Your story isn't just about business. It's about breaking through every barrier they tried to put in your way. You're changing the world, Sarah. Tears pricked her eyes as she read the words. I'm changing the world. She had worked for this, fought for it. And now, here she was, living it. The recognition had come, and with it, the doors to even greater opportunities. Global corporations had begun reaching out, eager to partner with her, to collaborate on initiatives for sustainable development and clean energy. Sarah's name was now synonymous with forward thinking and change. But as the world celebrated her success, Sarah knew deep down that the real challenge had only just begun. This was her moment. But there was more to be done, more to prove. And with a deep breath, Sarah stepped forward into the future, ready to continue the fight, not for recognition, but for a better world. But there was something else, something still waiting. The question lingered in her mind. How would she handle the inevitable rise of new competitors, the pressure to maintain this success, and the burden of expectation? For now, though, Sarah Thompson was unstoppable. The night after the Time Gala, Sarah stood at the window of her apartment, her eyes tracing the bright lights of the city below. The hum of the world outside felt distant, almost muffled, as if she were in a different realm. For a moment, it felt surreal that she had walked away from that stage with the weight of such an immense honor, but it also felt right. This was where she belonged. This was her place in the world. She had earned every inch of it. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Amanda. They'll be talking about you for years to come. You've changed the game, Sarah. Keep pushing. The words were a gentle reminder of everything she had fought for. She had done it. She had proven everyone wrong. The past few years had been a roller coaster, full of doubts, struggles, and moments when she almost let go. But now, standing on the other side, she could see the magnitude of what she had built. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about something bigger. It was about legacy. It was about paving the way for others to follow, especially women who felt like they didn't belong in a space dominated by men. Sarah knew that the work was far from over. As she sat down at her desk to respond to a few emails, she heard a knock on her door. She was so wrapped up in her thoughts that she didn't initially notice it was Lila and Jacob who stood in the doorway. Lila cleared her throat, looking awkward and unsure, while Jacob stood slightly behind her, his hands shoved into the pockets of his suit jacket. The last time Sarah had seen them together, things had been tense, strained, their disapproval of her choices still hanging between them. But tonight, there was something different in their eyes. Something she hadn't expected. Sarah, Jacob began, his voice hesitant but steady. We just wanted to say, we've been thinking a lot about everything. He glanced at Lila, who nodded in agreement. We were wrong. We didn't understand what you were doing, but now we see it. We see how far you've come, and we're proud of you. Lila spoke next, her voice softer than it had ever been. I want to apologize, Sarah, for everything, for not believing in you, for judging you. I see now that you were right all along. You've created something incredible. Sarah looked at them both. Their words were kind, but there was a part of her that couldn't shake the memory of their dismissive comments. The unemployed label, the constant doubt, all of it. She didn't respond immediately. She just looked at them, her heart pounding with a mix of emotions. They had apologized, but that didn't erase the sting of their earlier words. It didn't erase the years of questioning and undermining. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm but firm. I appreciate your apology, she said, her gaze shifting from Lila to Jacob, but I've built this life without your approval. I don't need it to feel validated anymore. Jacob's face faltered for a moment, but he nodded. I get that, Sarah. I do. Lila stepped forward, her eyes reflecting a deep sincerity. We're just so sorry for everything. I see now that this isn't just about the business. It's about who you are and what you've become. I hope you'll give us the chance to be part of your journey, even if it's just from the sidelines. Sarah gave a small smile, but there was no desire to hold on to the past. She had moved beyond the need for their approval. She had done the work, had fought through every setback, and had come out on top. Not because of them, but in spite of them. They had their place in her life, but it was no longer at the center. "I'm not looking back anymore," Sarah said softly. "I'm focused on the future. And that future includes more women rising, more businesses changing the world. I don't need to look back to find my way forward." Jacob and Lila exchanged glances, but neither of them pressed the issue. They both understood, maybe for the first time, how far Sarah had come. After they left, Sarah sat back in her chair, the weight of the night settling over her. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was an invitation to speak at a major international summit on climate change. The world was finally listening to her voice amplifying the change she had always dreamed of. As she looked out at the city skyline once more, she realized something. It wasn't just about the recognition. It wasn't about the awards or the titles. It was about the impact, the change, the lives that would be touched by her work, by her company. Her platform was bigger than she ever imagined, and with it came the responsibility to help others, to mentor, to support, and to lift up those who were just starting their journey. With a deep breath, Sarah stood, turning away from the window. She walked to her desk, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as she drafted a message to her team. The work was never truly done. There was more to build, more to accomplish. She wasn't done yet. The road ahead was long, and Sarah knew the challenges were far from over. But she was ready. She had learned what it meant to rise, and now it was time to help others do the same. This was just the beginning. The real journey was about to start. And Sarah was unstoppable. It had been months since the gala, since the night Sarah stood before a crowd of the world's most influential people, holding the title Times Person of the Year. The world had seen her rise from failure to triumph. But here, in the quiet of her office, as she scrolled through emails and prepared for another keynote speech, Sarah found herself reflecting on something deeper than the accolades and the recognition. She sat back in her chair, her hands resting on the cool surface of her desk. The lights from the city below flickered through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. She wasn't one to dwell on the past, but sometimes the journey felt so surreal, so far from the Thanksgiving dinner where she had been labeled unemployed, a failure in her family's eyes. Those moments, the ones that stung the most, were the ones that had propelled her. At the time, she had felt humiliated. But now, those words didn't just sting. They had ignited something in her, something fierce. The dismissiveness of her family, the subtle criticism from Jacob, and Lila's practical advice had created a fire in Sarah's soul, a fire that burned until it transformed her entire world. She had always been ambitious, always pushed herself to be more, but it was the doubt that had pushed her harder than she ever imagined. The world had labeled her something she wasn't, and Sarah wasn't one to accept false labels. She thought about Jacob's comment about delaying the inevitable, and Lila's belief that success was fleeting. It had been easy, at times, to let their doubt creep in, to wonder if maybe they were right. But she had learned something over the past year. Success wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about proving to herself that she had the strength to rise, to turn obstacles into stepping stones. That Thanksgiving, when they had cast her aside, she had unknowingly stepped into the fire that would shape her future. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about creating something that mattered. She had built a life she was proud of, not to show anyone else that they were wrong, but because it was what she had always wanted for herself. Sarah's speaking engagements had become more frequent, invitations arriving from universities and mentorship programs across the globe. She had been asked to share her story at places where young entrepreneurs, many like herself just a few years ago, gathered in the hopes of starting their own businesses. They wanted to know the secret to her success, to learn how she had built an empire from nothing but a dream and a refusal to accept failure. But as Sarah spoke to these young, wide-eyed individuals, she realized something. She had learned more than just how to build a business. She had learned how to fail, how to lose it all and get back up, how to hold on to the belief that tomorrow could always be better, no matter how bad yesterday had been. At her last speech at a prestigious university, a young woman approached her after the talk, her eyes bright with gratitude. "Your story is everything," she said. "I've been doubting myself, wondering if I can make it. But hearing you talk, it gives me hope. If you can do it, maybe I can too." The words hit Sarah like a wave of warmth. It was the first time someone had looked at her as not just an entrepreneur, but as someone who had paved the way. It wasn't just about the money or the recognition anymore. It was about creating opportunities for others to succeed. That, Sarah realized, was where her true success lay. Jacob had changed too. As Sarah's business continued to grow, Jacob had begun to wrestle with his own misconceptions about success and family. He had been so focused on his own career, his own comfort, that he hadn't realized the power of Sarah's vision. When he'd seen her receiving awards, hearing her name mentioned alongside the biggest names in business, it was clear to him. Sarah wasn't just a wife anymore. She was a force, a leader, someone who wasn't defined by the limits of those around her. He had always been a supportive partner in his way, but the shift in him was palpable now. He began to see that his earlier doubts had been a reflection of his own fear, not Sarah's limitations. He'd started attending more of her events, sitting in the front row as she took the stage, proud not only of her achievements, but of the woman she had become. But Sarah, while appreciative of his support, knew one thing for certain. She couldn't live for anyone else's approval anymore, not even his. The freedom she felt now, as a woman in control of her future, was something that could not be undone. As Sarah continued to speak at universities and mentor aspiring entrepreneurs, she began to notice something else, a shift in the stories she was hearing from the women she mentored. Many of them had faced similar challenges. They had been told they couldn't succeed, that they didn't belong in the industries they dreamed of. She shared her story, not just as an example of success, but as proof that resilience, hard work, and self-belief were the true keys to overcoming any obstacle. One evening, after a long day of meetings and calls, Sarah sat alone in her office, reviewing the list of upcoming speaking engagements. She had been invited to a prestigious women's leadership summit next year, and the thought of it filled her with pride. She wasn't just telling her story anymore. She was changing the narrative for so many others. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. A message from Lila. "I've been thinking a lot. I see now what you've done. I'm proud of you, Sarah. I never gave you enough credit. I'm sorry for that." Sarah smiled softly, but her thoughts remained on the bigger picture. She had done it. She had built something that would outlive any apology, any regret. Success wasn't about proving people wrong. It was about creating a future where everyone, especially women, had the chance to rise to the top. And Sarah Thompson wasn't done yet. She was just getting started. The weight of success was heavier than Sarah had anticipated. The accolades, the recognition, the global reach of her business, these were all things she had dreamed of for years. But now that they were within her grasp, she was beginning to feel the toll. There were days when she felt like she was drowning in responsibilities. Her inbox overflowed with emails from investors, potential partners, and the press. The demands of scaling her company were constant, and despite her best efforts, she was falling behind on personal commitments. It was late one evening, just after another long day of meetings, when Sarah found herself staring at the city skyline from her office window. The lights twinkled like stars below, but she felt a darkness creeping in. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. A text from Jacob. "You've been working nonstop. When's the last time we had dinner? Just the two of us." Her heart sank. The last time they'd had a quiet dinner together felt like a lifetime ago. They'd barely spoken in weeks. The business had taken over everything. Her thoughts, her time, her energy. "I'm sorry, Jacob," she whispered to herself as she typed a quick reply. "Let's plan something soon, I promise." But deep down, she knew it wasn't just about dinner. It was about the balance she had lost between work and personal life. She had sacrificed so much for her company, for her dreams, but at what cost? A few days later, Sarah met with Lila for coffee. They sat in a cozy cafe near Sarah's office, but there was a noticeable tension between them. Lila's eyes were dark with unspoken thoughts as she stirred her coffee, her words measured. "You know, Sarah," Lila began, "you've really made it. But I'm starting to wonder, at what cost? You're always working. You're never around anymore." Sarah's stomach twisted. She had heard the same accusation before, but this time it stung more. It was clear that Lila still didn't understand the demands of what Sarah had built. The question wasn't about the work. It was about the sacrifices. "I'm doing the best I can," Sarah said, her voice tight with frustration. "I'm not just working. I'm creating something that matters. But I can't control everything, Lila. There are things I can't change." Lila's eyes narrowed. "And what about your family? What about us? We were there for you when you had nothing. But now, it feels like you've forgotten about us." Sarah's chest tightened. The old resentment in Lila's voice was a reminder of the way things used to be. She wanted to explain, to justify the choices she had made, but she knew it wouldn't change anything. She had made peace with the fact that her family couldn't fully understand. Still, hearing it from Lila hurt. "I haven't forgotten you," Sarah said softly, her voice steady despite the pang in her heart. "But sometimes, things change. I'm not the same person I was when I started this journey, and that doesn't mean I don't care about you. It just means that I've learned to prioritize the future." Lila didn't say anything for a moment, and when she did, her voice was colder. "I just hope you can find balance before you lose it all." The words lingered in Sarah's mind as she left the cafe. The balance between work and life. Was it possible to have both? Or was success always going to require some form of sacrifice? At home that night, Sarah found Jacob in the living room, his face weary. He didn't have to say anything for Sarah to see the concern in his eyes. He had been quiet for weeks, giving her the space she needed to work, but now it was clear. The toll of her success had reached him too. "Sarah," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "you've built something incredible. But I'm worried about you. About us. You're stretching yourself too thin. You need to slow down." She could feel the weight of his words. He wasn't wrong. She had been running at full speed for so long, and now she was starting to feel the exhaustion creeping in. But the thought of slowing down, of stepping back, it terrified her. What would it mean for her company? For the future? "I can't slow down, Jacob. I'm this close to taking this company global. If I step back now, I might lose everything," she said, her voice rising. She immediately regretted the sharpness, but the pressure had built to a boiling point. "I have to keep going." Jacob's face softened, his tone still steady. "I get that, but I'm not asking you to give it up. I'm asking you to take a breath. Take a step back, even just for a moment. We've been through a lot, but I want you to be present. Not just for the business. For us." Sarah stood silently for a moment, the words settling into her chest. She had built this life, this empire, from nothing. But in the process, She had neglected the very people who had always been there for her. And now, standing on the precipice of even greater success, she was beginning to realize something she hadn't before. Success wasn't just about how much you achieved. It was about the relationships that mattered, the people who stood by you, who believed in you when no one else did. But were they still there if you couldn't find the time for them? That night, Sarah made a decision. She would not let the business consume her completely. She had learned to set boundaries before, but now it was time to do so again. She couldn't do everything, not all at once. And maybe, just maybe, she needed to let go of the guilt that came with it. Her phone buzzed again. Another request for an interview. Another contract to review. But this time, she hesitated before picking up the phone. For the first time in a long time, Sarah turned it off. She needed to find the balance. For her happiness. For her family. For herself. And the hardest part, she realized, was understanding that success could exist without sacrifice. But the real test was just beginning. Could she maintain this success without losing herself in the process? Could she protect the future she had built while still making room for what mattered most? The road ahead was uncertain, but Sarah knew one thing for sure. She was ready to fight for it. All of it. The world was starting to take notice. What had begun as an idea fueled by frustration and determination was now an undeniable force. Sarah's company, once a fledgling startup, had blossomed into a global brand, renowned for its innovative solutions at the intersection of sustainability and technology. Her name, once whispered in the back rooms of industry events, was now printed in bold across the covers of magazines and on the stages of international summits. As she walked into the expansive conference hall in Paris, the crowd before her buzzed with anticipation. Sarah had been invited to speak at the World Summit on Clean Energy, an honor that solidified her place as a leader in the field. She could feel the weight of the moment, the eyes of thousands focused on her, but instead of the usual nerves, there was only purpose. This was her chance to do more than speak about her journey. This was her opportunity to change the world, to reshape it in ways that not only honored her own success, but created paths for others to follow. As she took the stage, the room fell silent. She stood there for a moment, taking in the faces that looked up to her not as an entrepreneur, but as someone who had the power to make a real difference. I stand before you today not just as a businesswoman, but as a woman who's learned that true change isn't created by profits alone, Sarah began, her voice steady but carrying a weight of conviction. It's created by vision, by dedication, and by a refusal to accept the way things are if it doesn't lead to a better future for everyone. The crowd erupted into applause, and Sarah felt the electricity in the air. She wasn't just advocating for sustainable business practices. She was pushing for a paradigm shift. She was calling for every entrepreneur, every leader, and every individual to understand that the future of business and the future of the planet were intertwined. After the speech, Sarah spent hours in the hall, meeting with investors, policymakers, and other entrepreneurs, all eager to discuss collaborations, new initiatives, and solutions. Her words were making an impact, but it was the partnerships that were beginning to take shape that truly excited her. She was no longer just talking about change, she was becoming the catalyst for it. But it wasn't just the business world that was responding to Sarah's voice. Her company's success had given her a platform far beyond the walls of boardrooms and summits. She became an advocate for women in leadership, traveling the globe to speak at universities, mentorship programs, and conferences focused on empowering young women in tech and business. In one particularly emotional keynote held in Johannesburg, Sarah addressed an audience of thousands of young women, many of whom had faced the same struggles she had when starting out. The stories she heard from these young women mirrored her own, a desire to lead, to create, but a fear that the world wasn't ready to accept them. She stood at the podium, her hands gripping the sides as she looked out at the sea of faces. "I am proof that no dream is too big," she said, her voice full of emotion, "that your ideas, no matter how big or small, deserve to be heard. But more importantly, you deserve to lead, just as much as anyone else. Don't let anyone, tell you otherwise." The applause that followed was deafening. Sarah had been a trailblazer in her industry, but now she was creating a space for other women to rise. Her success had become a blueprint for others, a map of how to navigate the obstacles, the doubts, and the challenges that came with being a woman in a male-dominated field. As Sarah's company continued to expand, her influence did too. She began to sit on boards of major environmental initiatives, advising governments on policy changes related to sustainability and clean energy. She had gone from being the woman who was unemployed at Thanksgiving to being the one who could change the course of entire industries. But it wasn't just about what she could do for the world, it was about what the world could do for others. She invested in incubators for women entrepreneurs, providing seed money and mentorship to help them get their ideas off the ground. She made it clear that her success wasn't an individual achievement, it was the start of something bigger. One evening, after a long day of meetings and a successful round of partnerships, Sarah sat at her desk, her eyes scanning the latest round of reports. Her phone buzzed on the desk, a message from Lila. "I've been thinking a lot. You've changed everything. I can't even imagine the impact you're making. I'm proud of you, Sarah, and I finally see it now. You were right all along." Sarah stared at the message, a lump in her throat. She hadn't expected Lila to come around, but the words hit her in a way she didn't anticipate. For the first time, she realized how far she had come, not just in her career, but in herself. The doubts, the judgments, the criticisms, they were all a part of the journey. But it was the impact, the lives she had touched, that truly mattered. As she sat there, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, she knew she wasn't done yet. She had built something powerful, but the road ahead was still long. The future was a vast expanse, and there were more mountains to climb, more changes to make, and more voices to lift. She had become the leader she had always needed, a mentor, an advocate, a woman who had risen against every expectation, and now she was building a world where others could do the same. Her message, her journey, was far from over. The world was listening, and Sarah Thompson was ready to continue leading the way. The future, it seemed, was just beginning. The email came on a quiet evening, just as Sarah was wrapping up her day. The soft glow of her desk lamp illuminated the screen, casting long shadows across the room. The subject line caught her eye, an apology from Lila. It was brief, but the words beneath it held an unexpected weight. "I've been thinking a lot about everything we've been through, Sarah. The way I treated you, the doubts I had. I was wrong. I see now how far you've come, and I'm proud of you. I hope you can forgive me." Sarah stared at the screen, her heart unexpectedly heavy. She hadn't anticipated this moment, hadn't expected Lila to reach out after everything that had passed between them. The bitterness of their past conversations, the cold dismissals and the hurtful words about her unemployment still lingered in the back of her mind. But something about Lila's message made Sarah pause. It wasn't just the apology, it was the recognition. Sarah had changed, and for the first time, Lila was seeing it. Taking a deep breath, Sarah hesitated before typing her response. "Let's meet for coffee soon. We need to talk." She didn't feel the need to rush into forgiveness. She didn't owe that to anyone, least of all her sister. But as Sarah clicked send, she realized something. Forgiveness wasn't for them. It was for her. It was about moving forward, unburdened by the past. The coffee shop they chose was cozy, with dim lighting and the faint hum of conversation in the background. Sarah arrived early, her fingers nervously tapping against her mug as she watched the door. She wasn't sure what to expect from Lila now. Would they be able to talk openly? Or would there be more tension? Unspoken resentment simmering beneath the surface. Lila arrived, looking different somehow. Older, maybe. Her expression was less guarded, her eyes less defiant. She sat down across from Sarah, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I don't know where to begin," Lila finally said, her voice softer than Sarah remembered. "I was so caught up in my own idea of what success should look like that I couldn't see what you were doing. I judged you for chasing something I didn't understand." She looked down at her coffee, her hands fidgeting. "I was wrong. I've been wrong for a long time." Sarah looked at her sister, the person who had once been her biggest critic, now offering an apology she didn't expect. It was hard not to soften, but there was still a part of Sarah that held back. The past was written, and it couldn't be erased. Forgiveness would take time. "You weren't wrong about everything," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady. "I know you were looking out for me in your own way. But I also know that I had to do this for myself, not for anyone else." Lila nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "I get that now. I see it. I can't pretend I've always been supportive, but I've seen what you've built and it's incredible. You've built something bigger than just a business. You've created a legacy, and I'm sorry I didn't believe in you sooner." Sarah's heart softened, but she still wasn't sure how to move forward. "Thank you for saying that," Sarah replied, her voice quiet but firm. "But I've learned that I can't change the past. I've spent too much of my life focusing on the wrong things, on proving myself to others. I'm done with that." Lila swallowed, a flicker of emotion crossing her face. I don't want to keep being the person who doubted you. I want to be part of your life. I want to support you in whatever way I can." Sarah felt a pang of guilt, but she didn't let it overwhelm her. She had worked too hard, come too far to go backward. "We can figure that out, but on my terms. I've learned to set boundaries, Lila, and I won't let anyone, even family, undermine my work or my peace of mind." Lila nodded slowly, her face softening. "I understand. I'm here, and I won't get in the way again." For the first time, Sarah felt a sense of calm settle over her. She wasn't ready to completely embrace everything Lila said, but the gesture, the acknowledgement, meant something. It was a step forward, even if it was a small one. When Sarah returned home later that night, she found Jacob in the kitchen, preparing dinner, his familiar presence filling the room with warmth. He looked up at her as she entered, his face soft with curiosity. "How did it go?" he asked, setting the knife down on the cutting board. Sarah paused, thinking for a moment before responding. "It went better than I expected." Lila apologized. "She finally sees what I've been doing, and I think, for the first time, she understands." Jacob smiled, his relief evident. "I'm glad. I know it's been hard, but I'm proud of you for taking that step." She walked over to him, placing a hand on his arm. "It's not about forgiving everyone, Jacob. It's about choosing to move forward, without the weight of old grudges holding me back." They stood there for a moment, the silence between them filled with understanding. Sarah knew she couldn't change the past, but she could shape the future. And for the first time in a long time, she felt in control of that future. Not just in her career, but in her personal life as well. Later that night, as Sarah lay in bed, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Lila. "I'm proud of you, Sarah. I know it hasn't been easy, but you've done something amazing. I can't wait to see where this journey takes you. You've inspired me more than you'll ever know." A smile tugged at Sarah's lips as she typed a quick response. "Thank you for everything. We'll figure this out together." As she set the phone down and closed her eyes, Sarah realized something. Reconciliation wasn't about going back to what had been. It was about moving forward, creating new paths, and embracing the future with open arms. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt ready for whatever came next. Sarah stood at the edge of the balcony of her office, looking out at the sprawling city below. The skyline gleamed in the early evening light, a reflection of the empire she had built. One founded on the belief that businesses could be both profitable and sustainable. It was a vision she had fought for, nurtured through years of doubt and failure. And now, standing at the pinnacle of that vision, Sarah knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. Her company had transformed from a fledgling startup to the go-to leader in sustainable business practices, reshaping industries and influencing major corporate players. From renewable energy solutions to sustainable supply chains, her name was synonymous with innovation. Governments were turning to her for guidance on policy shifts. Major corporations sought her out for partnerships, and investors were clamoring to be part of the future she was creating. In the midst of all the success, Sarah had not lost sight of the bigger picture. She had never wanted to build just another company. She had wanted to create a movement, a ripple effect that would inspire change across industries and generations. And now, as her company led the charge in global sustainability, she was more determined than ever to ensure that the next wave of entrepreneurs, especially those with a passion for environmental impact, had the resources they needed to succeed. She had launched an incubator for young entrepreneurs, a space where ideas could flourish and visionaries could be nurtured. The incubator provided mentorship, funding, and guidance to aspiring business owners with a focus on sustainability. It was Sarah's way of giving back, of creating the opportunities that had been denied to her when she was just starting out. The first group of startups had already begun to make their mark. Sarah watched as these young entrepreneurs, many of whom were women and minorities, took the stage at conferences, shared their stories, and presented their projects to the world. She saw herself in them, the same spark of passion, the same hunger to prove that change was possible. It was one of her proudest achievements, knowing that her work was multiplying, that it wasn't just her success anymore, but a movement. At a major international summit on climate change, Sarah found herself speaking before a packed auditorium once again. This time, the topic wasn't just about sustainable practices in business. It was about the future of finance. The world was beginning to realize that sustainability wasn't just a niche concern. It was the bedrock of tomorrow's economy. Sarah's voice was steady as she laid out her argument for how green finance could be the catalyst for the next industrial revolution. She shared data, examples, and success stories from her company's projects, showcasing how investing in sustainable solutions could create long-term value for investors, corporations, and communities alike. As she spoke, she noticed Jacob in the crowd. He had joined her at major events more often now, attending summits and conferences with her. At first, he had been a passive participant, offering support from the sidelines. But now he was becoming an advocate for sustainable finance in his own right, taking on roles of his own, meeting with investors, and speaking on panels about how financial markets could support clean energy and environmentally conscious companies. The shift in Jacob had been gradual but undeniable. His previous doubts about the time and energy Sarah had dedicated to her work had transformed into genuine admiration and respect. He saw firsthand the impact of her work, not just in her company's growth, but in the way she was changing the entire landscape of business and finance. Later that evening, as they walked back to their hotel after the summit, Jacob took Sarah's hand. "I had no idea how much this would change the world," he said, his voice full of awe. "But now I see it. I see how much it means." Sarah smiled, her heart full. "We've only just begun," she said. "There's so much more to do." and I want you by my side for it. Back home, Sarah's influence continued to expand. She had been invited to consult with high-level advisory boards for international organizations, shaping policies on climate change and sustainability. Her voice was heard in rooms with world leaders, her ideas sparking the conversations that would shape the future. But the most gratifying part of it all was the impact her success was having on those closest to her. Lila had taken her own step toward change. Inspired by Sarah's example, she had started a project focused on raising awareness about the role women could play in global climate action. She was passionate about teaching women how to lead in the environmental space, and Sarah had offered her support, helping to guide her in starting her own initiatives. One afternoon, after a long day of meetings, Sarah sat down with Lila at a cafe. They spoke about the project Lila was launching, an initiative to train women in the tech and environmental sectors, providing them with the tools and resources to lead their own climate action initiatives. "You're doing this, Lila. You're making it happen," Sarah said, a proud smile on her face. Lila smiled back, but there was a quiet sadness in her eyes. "I should have done this sooner, shouldn't I?" Sarah shook her head, taking her sister's hand. "No, you're doing it now, and that's what matters. We're both doing this, creating change." Lila's voice wavered. "I can't believe how far we've come. It feels like a lifetime ago, when I didn't understand any of this. You've not only changed your life, Sarah, you've changed mine too." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. This, this was the impact she had always dreamed of. Not just building a business, but transforming the way people thought, the way they acted. Sarah's journey wasn't just her own anymore. It was a shared mission, one that would echo for generations. As Sarah stood at the podium one final time, preparing for a speech at the UN Climate Change Conference, she looked out over the audience of world leaders, entrepreneurs, and activists. Her journey had started with the simple idea that business could be a force for good, and now that idea had blossomed into something far beyond what she had ever imagined. The road ahead was still long, but Sarah Thompson was no longer just an entrepreneur. She was a leader, an advocate, a force of nature herself. And her story was just beginning. The world had changed. And in the midst of it all, Sarah Thompson stood at the pinnacle of the very change she had helped create. Her company, once a small idea born out of frustration, was now a household name. The impact of her work had spread far beyond the walls of her office and the walls of corporate boardrooms. It had transformed industries, shaped global policies, and paved the way for a new generation of leaders. She had become a symbol of what it meant to defy expectations, to build something that mattered, and to leave a legacy for the world. But as Sarah sat in her office, overlooking the city that had once felt so daunting, she couldn't help but think back on the moments when the world had told her she couldn't do it. She had been labeled unemployed at Thanksgiving, dismissed as just another dreamer with a pipe dream. Those moments of doubt, those harsh words from her family, had hurt. But now, standing in the glow of everything she had accomplished, she realized that they had been fuel for her fire, pushing her to prove not just the world but herself wrong. It had been a long road to get here, but it had been worth every step. As Sarah's company continued to thrive, her voice grew stronger in the fight for sustainability, for clean energy, for women in leadership. She had built more than a business, she had built a movement. And now, as she prepared to take on a new role, one she never imagined in her wildest dreams, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought her to this point. Her appointment as a UN ambassador for climate action had come as both a surprise and a fulfillment of her life's work. She had been invited to represent a generation of change-makers, to push forward initiatives that would impact not just businesses, but entire nations. Sarah had always dreamed of making a difference in the world, but she had never imagined that it would take this shape, that she would be standing on the global stage, helping to shape policy for generations to come. And yet, here she was, ready to step into that role. The office was quiet as Sarah prepared for her speech at the UN Climate Summit. The world would be watching her, waiting for the words that would shape the next chapter of her journey. The world had already seen the businesswoman, the leader, the trailblazer. But today, Sarah would speak not just for herself, but for millions of women, for the future of the planet, for those who believed that change was not just possible, but necessary. As she entered the conference hall, the weight of the room hit her. The responsibility, the expectation. But it didn't faze her. She had faced worse. She had walked through fire before. And it had only made her stronger. Today, she was ready to lead. I stand here not just as a businesswoman, but as a representative of a new way of thinking, Sarah began, her voice steady and commanding as she addressed the audience. The world has seen what innovation can do, but it has also seen what complacency can cost. We cannot afford to wait any longer. We must lead the way in building a sustainable future, where economic success is measured not just by profit, but by impact. The applause that followed was more than just polite recognition. It was the sound of a movement in the making. Sarah's words echoed through the hall, but it was the call to action that resonated with the crowd. She wasn't just speaking about sustainability in the abstract. She was speaking about concrete action, about policies, investments, and businesses that were already leading the charge. As the speech ended, Sarah was flooded with messages of support from world leaders, activists, and entrepreneurs alike. She had become the embodiment of the very change she had spent her life fighting for. And yet, as she walked off stage, the applause still ringing in her ears, she couldn't help but think of the people who had been there for her, who had supported her, and those who had once doubted her. Her family, who had once criticized her, now sat in the front row at the event. Jacob, his hand resting proudly on her shoulder, smiled at her from across the room. He had always believed in her, but now it was clear. He was no longer just her partner in life. He was her partner in change. Lila, too, had come a long way. Sarah's sister was now deeply involved in initiatives to raise awareness about women's roles in climate action. It wasn't just that Lila had come to terms with Sarah's success. It was that she had joined her, committed to the cause. The two women, once estranged, now stood together, united in purpose. Back home, Sarah's foundation continued to support aspiring female entrepreneurs with a particular focus on sustainability. She had created scholarships, mentorship programs, and access to funding for women across the globe who were seeking to change industries. What started as a dream to build a business had now grown into a global network, empowering women to lead, to innovate, and to create. As the years passed, Sarah spoke at major global events, sharing her story, her vision, and empowering others to rise above the obstacles that had once seemed insurmountable. She knew that her success was not just about the wealth or the recognition, it was about the doors she had opened for others, about creating a path where none had existed before. Her legacy, she realized, wasn't just in the companies she had built or the policies she had influenced. It was in the lives she had touched, the barriers she had broken, and the future she had paved for the next generation of women, leaders, and entrepreneurs. And as Sarah stood before the world once again, she knew her journey was far from over. It was just beginning. Sarah stood at the podium, her name emblazoned across the stage behind her, surrounded by the glow of flashing cameras and excited voices. The world had changed since she first stepped into the spotlight, and so had she. The once uncertain entrepreneur was now a global icon, celebrated for her unwavering commitment to sustainability and for pioneering a movement that had reverberated across industries and continents. Yet, as Sarah took a moment to reflect, the weight of her journey was not lost on her. Every challenge, every setback, every word of doubt from her past had shaped the future she now lived. Her company was thriving. It had become the standard in sustainable business practices, with every major corporation seeking her advice, every international organization eager to partner. But for Sarah, it was never just about the success of her business. It was about the world she was leaving behind, the path she was carving for those who would follow. The last few years had been a blur of endless meetings, international summits, and groundbreaking collaborations. Sarah's influence had grown beyond what she had ever imagined. From the UN to Fortune 500 companies, she was a thought leader, reshaping policies, setting standards, and pushing for a future that embraced sustainability at its core. But amid all the accolades and applause, Sarah never lost sight of the most important part of her success. The people who had stood by her, the ones who had supported her unconditionally, and those who had come to realize that change was not just possible, it was inevitable. Jacob, who had once watched from the sidelines, was now by her side every step of the way. No longer just her husband, he had become a partner in every sense of the word. Together, they had built something much bigger than either of them had dreamed. He was not just a supporter of her work. He was an advocate, traveling with her, meeting with investors, and helping to champion sustainable finance. He understood now that her success was not defined by the wealth she had accrued, but by the impact she was having on the world. "I used to think it was all about the money, the power," Jacob confessed one evening as they walked hand in hand down the streets of New York, the city lights casting a soft glow around them. "But now I see what you've done. It's about changing lives, building something lasting. You've built a future, Sarah." Her smile was soft, her hand tightening around his. "We've built it together," she said, knowing that he had always been there, even in the moments when she had been too consumed by her ambition to truly see it. But now, she saw him clearly. Her equal, her partner in both life and purpose. In the midst of her global responsibilities, Sarah had also found balance in her personal life. Time with Jacob, their quiet dinners at home, and moments of respite, away from the constant hum of business, had become precious. She was learning to set boundaries, to carve out space for the people who mattered most, without letting their opinions dictate her choices. Her family, once skeptical of her every move, had come to respect her decisions. They now saw the larger picture, and while they were still learning to adapt to her success, they were no longer the voices of doubt that once weighed her down. Lila, who had once been the most vocal of her critics, had grown into a leader in her own right. Inspired by Sarah, she had started her own initiative to empower women in environmental sustainability. She was mentoring young women, teaching them how to use their voices to drive change, and Sarah couldn't have been prouder. They were no longer just sisters, they were allies, pushing forward together, each one shaping the future in her own way. Sarah's life was now a whirlwind of travel, of meetings with heads of state and influential leaders from across the globe. Her voice echoed through conference halls, urging change, demanding accountability, and advocating for a sustainable future. She had become the face of a new era in business, one that didn't just aim to make a profit, but to make a difference. But for all the recognition, all the milestones, Sarah knew that true success wasn't measured by awards or titles. It was about the impact she had made, the lives she had touched, and the changes she had inspired. Her work wasn't just about building a brand, it was about shifting the way the world thought, the way it acted, and the way it moved forward. As she stood on the stage one final time, accepting an award for innovation and sustainability, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought her here. The world had once doubted her, had written her off as just another dreamer. But now, she had built something real, something lasting. She had created a future that no one could take away. Looking out at the audience, Sarah's heart swelled. She had built this legacy with her own hands, with every challenge and every sacrifice. And now, she stood as proof that anything was possible, that success wasn't defined by where you started, but by how fiercely you fought to build the future you believed in. They doubted me, Sarah thought as the applause rang in her ears. But now I've built a future that no one can take away, and that's the true measure of success. She smiled, ready for the next chapter. And whatever came next, Sarah Thompson was ready to lead the way.